If I'm not gardening, I'm probably reading. So I'm sure it comes as no surprise that there's some overlap here. And I have a bunch of gardening books in my library. So today I wanted to take you through my top 10 books for gardening or just gardening adjacent books that all cover different categories and subcategories of gardening in really specific ways that have been important to me in developing my own experience and knowledge as a gardener. So I'm going to go through these in no particular order and I'll list them all down below if you want to grab any of them. But this won't be like a specific deep dive review on any of these. I love them all. Let's just start off by saying that they're my favorites. I just want to give you a broad overview of them because I know a lot of us aren't really going into bookstores very much anymore, although we should be. So sometimes it's nice to be able to flip through and get an idea of something before you grab it for your own bookshelves. So we'll start off with one that if you're a beginner gardener or you just need a really good reference, I think is a really good place to start. A lot of these will have kind of individual basics of gardening sections within them, but this one in particular, I feel like is a great resource that you can just kind of flip through whenever. And this is Vegetable Gardening Made Easy by Resh Gala. Resh is a fellow Zone 6 gardener in New Jersey. And her book is really beautiful. It's advertised as having over 80 different inspiring, resourceful ways to supercharge your garden. Resh is a professional garden designer and her garden designs are so beautiful. So she has a whole section toward the front of the book about how to build raised beds, how to design your garden, where it should go, deciding what to grow. So if you're really just starting out, that section is incredibly helpful. But she also has good troubleshooting stuff, like why are my carrots deformed, which I know we've talked about a lot on this channel too in my carrot growing video, which I'll link for you. She also has some great information on things like controlling slugs in your garden. And then the whole of chapter 6 is all about harvesting and preserving your produce. So we've got some really delicious recipes in here for pickling cucumbers, making tomato sauce, as well as tips for refreshing and amending your soil and extending the growing season. So this is one that we don't see in a ton of gardening books, but because Resh is also in Zone 6, she deals with the same things I do with our short growing season and follows a lot of the same principles and practices that I do in terms of extending that season with really simple methods and kind of just working with nature instead of against it. So this is Vegetable Gardening Made Easy by Resh Gala. Highly recommend. The next book was one that really changed my mindset on a lot of things when it came to interacting with the natural world. So it's less of a specific instructional how-to and more of just like a deep dive on rekindling your connection with the earth. And that's Our Kindred Home by Allison Morgan. This is a life-changing book, to be honest. Her writing is just so beautiful. She focuses a lot on herbalism, medicinal plants, and things that help us connect with nature, but it's also very easy to digest and accessible language that anybody can understand. And her photos are just absolutely gorgeous. So there's a lot of beautiful recipes in here like this elderflower cream and a strawberry tart. And there's also some really great botanical information on individual plants such as catmint that have beautiful illustrations to help you identify it and understand the different parts and how it can be used. So this has that kind of herbalism focus that I was talking about, where it's going to explain to you different things about the herbal actions, energetics, and its preparation, as well as how to grow it. So there's a whole section in here that covers all of these different plants, as well as more recipes sprinkled within like this garlic mustard pull-apart bread. But I have to say chapter 1 is probably my favorite. It talks a lot about our disconnection from the natural world and what has happened and how we can kind of correct for it. So I'll just read you the first section here. It says, when we are stuck, hurt, grieving, or healing, there is a plant that craves an intimate relationship with us. Plants inform every part of our human experience. Our food, our homes, the pages of our books, and our medicine all originated from plants, especially before the creation of synthetic materials. We are a part of the natural world. Prized goods in our modern societies, from sugar, coffee, pharmaceuticals, and drugs, electronics, are plant-based and mineral-based. Our human-built world is dependent on the natural world, but our current relationship is an exploitive one. We often look outside ourselves for grand, complex solutions and futuristic technologies to save us from our problems. But what if the solutions we seek are right underfoot, buried in our ancient and imperfect human ways? So this book really is just very introspective and deep, but I love how she combines that introspective deepness with real concrete ways that we can connect with nature and take better care of ourselves. So that's Our Kindred Home by Allison Morgan. Hi friends, if you're watching this, that means that I've already started my maternity leave and this video is pre-recorded. I just wanted to thank you really quick for continuing to support the channel while I'm out, because while I'm really excited to take this time off to spend with my baby, I am self-employed. I do not get maternity leave. So every time you watch any of my videos or subscribe to the channel, it really does help. You can also support the channel by checking out my super soft merch down below the description. There's also a whole bunch of ebooks and gardening guides down there for you as well. Thanks again and hope you enjoy the video. One of my favorite parts of the garden that we've really worked on over the last couple of years has been the backyard orchard. And we've been doing this with this backyard orchard culture method, which allows us to grow more trees in a smaller space. So my trees are only like 4 or 5 feet apart. And I get a lot of questions about this. I have a lot of videos going into it in more detail on my page. But honestly, everything I learned about growing tiny fruit trees came from the book Grow a Little Fruit Tree by Anne Ralph. So this explains in great detail, not just the history of where this concept came from, but exactly how to implement it in your garden, including pruning. It explains different types of rootstocks that you might encounter when you're shopping for trees. It will give examples of different diseases and how to manage and treat them. There's entire sections that are dedicated to just kind of describing different types of fruit trees. So if you're less familiar with something like a persimmon, it can be really helpful when you're making a decision. Because with fruit trees in particular, like, it's a lot of decisions to make that are going to have an impact over a long period of time. You don't want to plant a persimmon tree and then find out 5 years after you planted it and are finally getting a big harvest off it that you don't even like persimmons. So there's a lot of research up front that goes into starting a backyard orchard that she really gets into. And the index has been super helpful for me just for quick reference after I scanned through the whole book as I'm continuing to develop the orchard and grow it. But especially if you're feeling lack of confidence around pruning in particular, she has a really great section that goes into specifics about pruning and will make it feel really easy and accessible. So that's Grow a Little Fruit Tree by Anne Ralph. And then this next one I'm counting as one book, but it's actually 3 separate books. And these are all from Herbal Academy. It's the Botanical Teas recipe book, the Botanical Skincare recipe book, and the Botanical Mixed Drinks recipe book. So these are my primary sources of inspiration for any of the recipe videos that you see on my page, because a lot of the recipes in here are really easily accessible. I find a lot of times when I'm looking at herbal recipes for things, they don't always have easily accessible ingredients. They can have a lot of things that it's like, okay, I'm not gonna just buy a pound of this just to make one single drink. So while there are some more unique combinations in here, I have always been able to find something that I can make using what I already have on hand in my apothecary. And they do a really good job of categorizing things. Like in the botanical tea book, for example, they label stuff that's kid safe and pregnancy safe, which has been really important for me this time around. And it's all beautifully, beautifully illustrated just to kind of give you an example of what you can expect from the inside of here. Everything has these colorful illustrations in it, and each book is typically organized by season too. So another way that you can easily and quickly reference something as you're going along, because you don't have to kind of skim through everything to find something that's going to use stuff that's currently in season in your area. They're a great starting point for inspiration if you're feeling overwhelmed with herbalism in general, because each one also has an introduction section that explains a lot of terminology that may be new to you if you're just starting off in herbalism. So those are the botanical recipe books from Herbal Academy. And then something we don't get to talk about a lot because my beds are container gardens and I don't get to incorporate as many permaculture methods as I maybe would like to, is permaculture in general. And I think for a really great example of that, we can look to the Layered Edible Garden by Christina Chung. So this does a really good job of explaining a lot of the principles of permaculture with this emphasis on kind of following nature's lead. Her focus is primarily on edible plants, which is incredibly important to me specifically, and how we incorporate those into 8 distinct layers to make essentially a food forest. So she's going to deep dive in this on some of the best perennial plants that you can grow in your garden that are edible to give you a better idea of what you may and may not want to grow. She also gets into the design elements a lot. So if that's something that you find overwhelming, it can be incredibly helpful. But each kind of layer of your garden is going to have a different section. So we've got the shrub layer here. She breaks down what a shrub layer is, examples of what you might include in a shrub layer, and then deep dives on individual plants that fall within that category of shrub layer. And within that deep dive, you will find the layer, the edibility, light requirements, size, habit and form, native range, lowest hardiness temperature. It's very detailed and from a very good scientific perspective, I would say. She also talks a lot about site preparation and just getting your garden ready if you're starting over from scratch. So if you're looking to grow a garden in a low maintenance way and you're growing in ground, permaculture is the best way to do that because you're working with nature and not against it. And this book really sums up exactly how to do that. So that is The Layered Edible Garden by Christina Schunk. And then if you're really wanting to start branching out into things that maybe are a little bit outside of your wheelhouse, a little bit outside of the normal kind of common vegetables that we grow here in the States, like your tomatoes and cucumbers and all of that, you've got to get this next book. This is Your Asian Veggie Patch by Connie Kao. Connie does an excellent job of highlighting a lot of things that are a little bit more unusual to the American palate, but very important, influential plants within her own culture. So the book does start off with a great section on just permaculture gardening, gardening essentials, and then she really gets into individual plant profiles. So we have a whole section on bok choys. It will explain a bunch of the different varieties that there are, its growing conditions, how to harvest, how to store, and then it will get into cooking. So each specific variety that she covers will then have specific recipes associated with it. And there's stuff in here that I've just never heard of before because I just don't have that broad of a palate, unfortunately. And this book has been extremely helpful in widening my horizons and diversifying what I eat. Another great thing about a lot of the Asian veggies is that they tend to do really well in colder climates. So when you get into kind of all season gardening in a colder climate, like I'm in zone 6 and anything below that where you kind of get a hard freeze over the winter, you're going to start noticing that the vast majority of what you can continue to grow is Asian greens. And a lot of times we're growing these new things and we're so excited about it, but we don't even know what to do with them or what's been done with them traditionally in the cultures where they've been grown. So this book is a really great way to educate yourself on that and get a broader view of what is available to you to grow. So that's The Asian Veggie Patch by Connie Kao. And this is the most recent book to my collection. We actually did a whole podcast interview with the author Becky Searle on the Garden Girls podcast if you want to check that out. So we have Grow a New Garden by Becky Searle. And this is a really great, another kind of fundamental primer if you're new to gardening. A lot of this is really just about starting a garden for the first time with either a blank slate or repairing an old garden that you've just moved to. But I have to say, chapter 2, which is all about soil, really opened my eyes to a lot of stuff that even though I understood it on a basic level as somebody who's been gardening for a long time, Becky's experience as a trained ecologist really helped me to understand it in a way that was easily digestible and made it so that I felt like I was more confident in explaining it to other people, which is how I gauge whether I fully understand a concept or not. So Becky's focus is really primarily on the ecology of your garden, on forming a full, complete ecosystem, and the importance and benefits of having all sorts of wildlife and bugs in your garden. And the section on soil in particular makes this book worth it just for that alone, because she really does explain exactly how soil works and why it's important and how it matters and how you can make your soil better. So that's Grow a New Garden by Becky Searle. Now, if you are considering growing further into the year and you want to do something like my cattle panel hoop house greenhouse, we need to go to the experts in this. And by far and away, the main expert in this who pioneered a lot of the concepts I've used in my own garden to continue to grow all season long is Elliot Coleman and his book, The Winter Harvest Handbook. So Elliot Coleman is a market gardener who lives in Maine, and he found a way to successfully continue to grow large quantities of produce in the coldest Maine winters using unheated or minimally heated greenhouse spaces. So what he really did was continue to work with nature and not against it in ways where a lot of times we see growing over the winter, we need to kind of use a lot of technology, a lot of energy, and a lot of effort. And this is very low effort. So of course it dives deep into 30 different crops that are great for growing in cold temperatures, which is great if you're just kind of getting off to a start on that and understanding it. But what I found most helpful in this book is that he describes a lot of different construction techniques for styles of greenhouses that you can make from small, to very large. And he really gets into the technical aspects of the differences we need to keep in mind in terms of the lack of sunlight that we have and timing, which is really important when we talk about growing in a cold climate. Because a lot of the times, as he explains in the book, we don't really have as many hours of daylight as we need for plants to grow. So what we're essentially doing is getting them to hold in the ground successfully. And he describes how to do that with some really incredible charts that make it super straightforward. So that's the Winter Harvest Handbook by Elliot Coleman. And then something I really need to get better at, which is why I grabbed this book, is compost. This is the Compost Coach by Kate Flood, and it truly is the most comprehensive resource I've ever seen on how to compost in your garden successfully. It has everything. Like, this book is thick, and all we're talking about is compost. And her whole thing is that compost doesn't have to be smelly and it doesn't have to be time-consuming. So I love how accessible this makes composting for any home gardener. One of the things I think is so overwhelming about composting is there's so many different methods and kits and just ways to do it. So she really breaks down what all of those methods are and why they may not work for you. Okay, my camera just overheated while I was trying to film that last little bit, but I think that was all I had to say about the Compost Coach by Kate Flood. I actually discovered the authors of the next book on social media because they were doing this challenge I had never seen before, where they were literally trying to live off the land, basically only eating things that they had either grown, foraged, or hunted for as long as possible. It was a really cool challenge. They have a lot of really unique recipes that they highlighted in that. And I believe that was the jumping off point for their book, Homegrown Hand Gathered. This is by Sylvan Godin and Jordan Toney. And this, again, is a really great primer book, especially into the permaculture methods, with a lot of like science-backed information in it as well, if that's something that you're into. So just think of it more as like a general, like comprehensive manual for organic gardening methods. So this goes over site selection, garden design, seed starting, managing pests and weeds, compost, preserving the harvest, and recipes. So the whole front of the book is going to be more of that garden basics and concepts that you need to understand. There's a really cool section here on fungi biology, which I think is something that's kind of overlooked in a lot of the gardening books. They get into succession planting as well as all the different materials that make up good soil and kind of soil health in general. They also just give a broad overview of different preservation techniques like canning and pickling. And then you get into more of the actual produce sections. So they do have grow guides on a lot of different varieties of produce like beets. But what's really interesting about these plant profiles is specifically like if we look at beans, it will tell you per pound how many calories you can expect to get from it, how many carbs, protein, fat, and any important micronutrients that are present in that particular produce. So this is really helpful, like nutrition information. If you're trying to do a challenge specifically like they were living off the land, you need to be really mindful of this stuff in particular. So it's just good information to have. So they'll go into like the seed starting, growing conditions for each of those different categories of plants, pests and diseases that you might encounter when you're planting them, their favorite varieties, when and how to harvest and preserve them. And then they get into recipes that are related. So we have a really good pot of beans for beans, as well as this amazing hearty Arabic stew that I just really, really want to try. It looks so good. And I think, yeah, you can use either meat or mushrooms. So there's a vegan alternative listed as well, which is really cool. So that's Homegrown Hand Gathered by Sylvan Godin and Jordan Toney. Another great read. All right, that's my top 10 favorite gardening books right now, but I want to hear your favorite gardening books in the comments because I'm always looking for an excuse to support garden authors and check out their books too. If you don't have a specific suggestion for me, if you want to leave a comment letting me know like which of those 10 books you're most interested in reading, I would love to hear that too. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.